The ambassador's daughter touched the containment field, and every human in the orbital academy froze. Captain Marcus Webb didn't shout. He didn't rush forward. He simply raised one hand, palm out, and the entire security detail stopped mid-stride. The Vryn child, no more than 6 cycles old by their standards, had her 3-fingered hand pressed against the shimmering barrier that separated the observation deck from the vacuum beyond. The field hummed, stable for now, but Webb saw the microfluctuations in the energy readings on his wrist display. "Nobody moves," he said quietly. Ambassador Thranxis hadn't noticed yet. The tall mantis-like diplomat was engaged in animated conversation with the Academy's chancellor, their translator device chirping rapidly. The tour group, 20 dignitaries from across the Galactic Confederation, chattered among themselves about humanity's quaint space station. They'd been calling Earth a failed world for 3 generations now. Too violent. Too primitive. Too stubborn to accept that their planet's harsh conditions made them unfit for proper civilization. Webb had stopped caring about their opinions years ago. The child pressed harder against the field. Her large obsidian eyes reflected the starlight beyond, filled with wonder. She was leaning forward now, her small body tilting toward the barrier. Webb calculated angles, distances, reaction times. If the field failed, she had maybe 2 seconds before decompression pulled her through the gap. At her size and mass, she'd be gone in 1. He moved like water, smooth and inevitable. 3 steps brought him to her side. He knelt, making himself smaller, less threatening. His hand hovered near her shoulder but didn't touch. The Vryn were contact-sensitive, could perceive threat through skin contact alone. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Webb said softly. The child's antenna twitched. She didn't pull away from the field, but she turned her head slightly toward him. "The stars sing," she whispered in broken standard. "Mother says Earth people cannot hear them." "We hear different songs," Webb replied. He glanced at the field readings. Fluctuations increasing. The station was old, a relic from humanity's first desperate push into space after the Confederation had denied their application for membership. The barriers were maintained, but they weren't Confederation standard. They weren't meant to handle the electromagnetic signature of Vryn biology. "Little one," Webb said, still calm, still gentle. "If you step back, I can show you something better than stars." "There is nothing better than stars." "There is. There's the reason we came from a failed world and still made it here." That got her attention. Her hand lifted from the field just slightly, and Webb felt his heart rate slow by 5 beats per minute. Control. "Ozester Thanxis!" The Chancellor's voice cut through the observation deck like a blade. "Your daughter!" Everything happened in the space between heartbeats. Thranxis spun, saw his child near the barrier, and released a piercing shriek of alarm that sent 3 other species in the tour group stumbling backward. He lunged forward, all 6 limbs flailing in panic. The sudden electromagnetic surge from his fear response hit the containment field like a hammer. The barrier flickered. Webb was already moving. He swept the child up with one arm, twisted his body away from the field, and dropped into a protective crouch. His free hand slapped the emergency containment panel on the wall. Secondary barriers slammed into place with a thunderous crack, triple-layered, drawing power from the station's core reserves. The observation deck went silent. Webb stood slowly, the Vryn child cradled against his chest. She was trembling, her antenna flat against her skull. He could feel her rapid heartbeat through her thorax, a hummingbird rhythm that spoke of terror she didn't yet have words for. "She's safe," Webb said. He looked directly at Thranxis, whose compound eyes were dilated wide with shock. "She's unharmed." The ambassador reached for his daughter with shaking limbs. Webb transferred her carefully, ensuring the handoff was secure before stepping back. His security team had formed a perimeter without being ordered to do so. Good soldiers. Earth-trained soldiers who understood that panic killed faster than vacuum. Chancellor Morstan, a Quellan whose species had voted against Earth's Confederation membership twice, was the first to speak. "Captain Webb, I apologize. Our safety protocols should have prevented—" "Your safety protocols are designed for species that don't panic," Webb interrupted quietly. "No offense intended, Chancellor, but your people haven't lived on a world that tried to kill them every day. You haven't evolved to react to immediate danger. We have." Thranxis clutched his daughter close, but his eyes remained fixed on Webb. "You moved before I even called out." "Yes, sir. How?" Webb gestured to the viewport, where Earth hung in the distance, a blue-green marble wrapped in white clouds. "Deathworld reflexes, Ambassador." When your planet has predators that can smell fear, when storms can form in minutes, when the ground can open up and swallow cities, you learn to read situations before they become disasters. You learn to stay calm when everything's falling apart. We call Earth a failed world, Thranxus said slowly. I know, sir. We say your species is too damaged by your origin to join civilized space. Webb nodded. I've read the reports. The ambassador's antenna slowly rose from their flattened position. We are fools. No, sir. You're safe. There's a difference. Webb turned to address the entire tour group, 20 faces from a dozen species, all staring at him with various expressions of shock, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. You come from garden worlds, paradise planets where evolution was gentle, where intelligence developed in cooperation, not competition. You built your civilization on trust and shared resources. It's beautiful. It's what we aspire to. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. But when something goes wrong in your paradise, you freeze. You panic. You've never had to develop the reflexes that keep you alive when survival isn't guaranteed. One of the delegates, a crystalline shardling whose species communicated through light patterns, pulsed a question. Their translator rendered it as you believe your harsh world makes you superior. No, Webb said firmly. I believe it makes us different. Useful in different ways. Ambassador Thranxus set his daughter down gently, though he kept one limb resting on her shoulder. Captain Webb, I came to this station to write my final report on why humanity should remain excluded from the Confederation. I had 17 reasons prepared: genetic aggression, historical violence, psychological instability. All fair observations, sir. You just saved my daughter's life without hesitation, without fear, without even raising your voice. Webb met the ambassador's eyes. That's what we do, sir. We survive. We protect. We keep moving forward even when the universe tells us we're not good enough. He glanced at Earth again, that beautiful, terrible world that had forged humanity in fire and ice, and the endless struggle to see another sunrise. We're Deathworlders, Ambassador. We don't fear nothing. We fear everything. We've just learned to act anyway. The observation deck remained silent for a long moment. Then Thranxus's daughter tugged on her father's limb and whispered something too quiet for the translators to catch. The ambassador's antenna quivered, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. Captain Webb, I would like to extend our tour. There is much about Deathworlders, it seems, that we have failed to understand. Webb allowed himself the smallest smile. I'd be honored to show you, sir. Though I should warn you, understanding us and liking what you learn aren't always the same thing. I suspect, Thranxus said, still holding his daughter close, that is precisely why we need to learn. The tour continued 3 hours past its scheduled duration. Webb led them through the agricultural domes first, where human engineers had coaxed crops from 17 different worlds to grow in Earth-standard soil, adapting each species through trial, failure, and relentless experimentation. The delegates marveled at the genetic modifications, the hybrid strains, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. We were told your bioengineering was primitive, Chancellor Morstan admitted, running a tendril across a stalk of Quellan wheat that shouldn't have been able to survive in anything but pure nitrogen atmosphere. This is extraordinary work. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Webb's second-in-command, was the one who answered. She was smaller than Webb, with quick eyes that tracked everything in her peripheral vision. It's necessity, Chancellor. Earth taught us that adaptation is survival. When the Confederation restricted our access to standard food shipments during the trade disputes, we had two choices: starve or learn. You chose to learn, Thranxus observed. We always choose to learn, Chen replied, even when learning hurts. They moved to the medical wing next, where human doctors worked alongside the station's diverse population. Webb watched as Dr. James Morrison demonstrated a surgical technique he'd developed for repairing shardling crystalline matrices, something the shardling's own physicians had declared impossible due to the invasive nature required. Your appendages are so soft, the shardling physician pulsed in amazement. How do you work with such precision? Morrison held up his hands, turning them over to show the scarred, calloused fingers. Practice. Lots of practice. On Earth, we have creatures called surgeons who used to operate with tools cruder than these. They learned to work with what they had, and we inherited that knowledge. Soft doesn't mean weak. Flexible doesn't mean fragile. Thranxus's daughter had been quiet since the incident at the observation deck, but now she tugged on Webb's uniform sleeve. He knelt again, bringing himself to her eye level. Yes, little one, "Why did you not run away when the wall flickered?" she asked. Her standard was improving as her translator adapted to human speech patterns. "Father says retreat is wisdom when danger appears." Webb considered his answer carefully. Around them, the entire delegation had gone quiet, waiting to hear how he would respond to a child's question that cut to the heart of everything that separated humanity from the rest of the Confederation. "Your father is right," Webb said. "Retreat is wisdom when retreat is possible. But sometimes, little one, retreat isn't an option. Sometimes the danger is faster than you are, or bigger, or smarter. Sometimes retreat means leaving someone behind." He paused, ensuring she was following his words. "On Earth, we learned a long time ago that when you can't run, you stand. When you can't fight, you endure. When you can't win, you make sure the people you're protecting have a chance to survive. Even if you don't survive," the observation deck felt very cold suddenly. Webb was aware of every eye on him, every translator working to capture the nuance of what he was about to say. This moment would be in Thranxis's report. It would be analyzed, debated, possibly used as evidence for or against humanity's admission to the Confederation. He answered honestly. Even then. The child's antenna drooped. "That's sad." "Sometimes," Webb agreed. "But it's also how we survived when everything wanted us dead. It's how we built cities on a world that flooded them, burned them, shook them to rubble. It's how we made it to the stars even after being told we weren't ready, weren't civilized enough, weren't evolved enough." He smiled gently. "It's sad, but it's also what makes us human. We protect each other even when protection costs everything." Thranxis made a sound that the translator couldn't quite render, something between reverence and grief. "Captain, I need to see your training facilities." Webb stood, meeting the ambassador's compound eyes. "Sir, I'm not sure that's—" "I need to see them," Thranxis insisted. "I need to understand how you create soldiers who think like you do, how you build a military force that prioritizes protection over conquest." Chancellor Morston's tendrils coiled with unease. "Ambassador, perhaps this isn't necessary for your report." "It is absolutely necessary," Thranxis interrupted. "The Confederation has 300 member species. We have the finest defensive fleets in known space. We have weapons that can crack planets and shields that can withstand stellar radiation. But we have never, in our entire history, successfully evacuated a station under hostile conditions without catastrophic casualties." His voice carried the weight of old failures, old losses. "Because when danger comes, we freeze, we debate.
We form committees, and people die while we're being civilized."
Webb exchanged a glance with Chen. She gave a slight nod. This was his call, his responsibility. "Follow me," he said. The training facilities were in the lower decks, where the station's rotation created the closest approximation to Earth gravity. Webb led them through security checkpoints that required biometric scans, radiation badges, and signed waivers. The Confederation delegates signed without reading them, too curious now to care about legal niceties. The first chamber was a simulation room, currently running a scenario that made several of the delegates gasp in horror. A holographic recreation of a civilian transport showed a hull breach in progress, with panicked passengers flooding toward inadequate escape pods. Human trainees moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, organizing evacuation queues, sealing emergency bulkheads, even sacrificing their own escape opportunities to ensure civilians reached safety. "This is a training exercise?" Morstan asked, his translator almost failing to convey his shock. "This is a historical recreation," Webb corrected. "The Helix Station disaster, 15 years ago. Confederation transport, mixed civilian population, critical systems failure during a routine supply run." He watched as the simulation played out, watched as the human response team saved 80% of the passengers while losing half their own number. The official Confederation response team arrived 40 minutes after the breach. By then, the station was gone. 3,000 civilians lost. "I remember this incident," a delegate from the Kess Collective whispered. "The report said the situation was unsalvageable." "It was," Chen said flatly. "But humans don't accept unsalvageable. We went in anyway. We saved who we could save. We documented what we learned. And now every trainee on this station runs this scenario until they can do it better than the original team did. The simulation ended. The holographic casualties faded, but the weight of their deaths remained heavy in the air. One of the trainees, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20 Earth years, stood at attention as Webb approached. "Trainee Rodriguez report. Sir, civilian evacuation at 84%, sir. Casualty rate among response team at 47%. Breach containment successful, sir." "Better than the historical outcome?" Webb noted. Not good enough, sir. 17% of civilians still lost. We could do better. Webb nodded. Dismissed. Run it again. She saluted and returned to her squad. Within seconds, the simulation reset, and the nightmare began again. Webb turned to find Thranxis staring at him with an expression the translator couldn't parse. She said it wasn't good enough, the ambassador said slowly. She saved 84% of civilians in an impossible scenario, and she said it wasn't good enough. On Earth, Webb said quietly, good enough has never been sufficient. We came from a world that killed 99% of the species that evolved on it. We're the descendants of the survivors, Ambassador. The ones who looked at impossible odds and decided they'd rather die trying than accept defeat. He gestured to the trainees running the simulation again. That's what we teach here. Not violence. Not aggression. Not conquest. We teach that every life is worth fighting for, that retreat is only acceptable when it saves more lives than it costs, and that good enough is just another way of saying we gave up too soon. The tour moved through combat training next, but what they saw wasn't what they expected.
No weapons practice. No tactical assault courses.
Instead, they watched humans practicing zero-gravity rescue techniques, training on how to stabilize wounded civilians from 17 different species, learning to operate in atmospheric conditions that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. Where are the weapons? Morstan asked. In the armory, Webb replied. We train for violence, Chancellor, but we train harder for survival. Any fool can pull a trigger. It takes skill to save a life under fire. They spent an hour watching trainees work through scenarios that grew progressively more impossible. Reactor containment while under attack. Civilian evacuation during atmospheric breach. Hostage rescue where the hostages outnumber the rescuers 50-1. Every scenario ended the same way. Human casualties high, civilian casualties lower, mission parameters exceeded. You're training them to die, Thranxis said, and for the first time since the tour began, he sounded angry. This isn't military training, this is systematic sacrifice. Webb faced him directly. No, Ambassador. We're training them to make the hard choice when the hard choice is the only option left. Every one of these soldiers volunteered. Every one of them knows the risks, and every one of them believes that their life is a fair trade for innocent lives saved. He paused, letting that sink in. You call it sacrifice, we call it duty. We call it honor, we call it the price of being stronger than the people we protect. Your species is insane. Our species is alive, Webb countered. We came from a failed world, Ambassador. We survived ice ages and supervolcanoes and extinction events that should have wiped us out a dozen times over. We learned that the strong protect the weak not because of laws or regulations, but because when the world is trying to kill everyone, survival depends on cooperation, on sacrifice, on being willing to stand between danger and those who can't defend themselves. He turned to address the full delegation. You want to know why Deathworlders fear nothing? We don't. We fear everything. We fear failure. We fear loss. We fear that our sacrifices won't be enough, that we'll make the wrong call, that we'll save the wrong person or lose someone we could have saved with one more second, one more effort, one more impossible choice. His voice remained level, calm, but it carried the weight of every fallen soldier, every failed rescue, every name on the memorial wall back on Earth. But we've learned that fear is just information. It tells us where the danger is. It doesn't tell us to run. It tells us to be smart, be careful, and be ready to pay the price that needs paying. Thranxis' daughter moved forward, stepping past her father to stand directly in front of Webb. She looked up at him with those huge obsidian eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and precise. When I touched the wall and it flickered, you were afraid. Yes. But you didn't run? No. Why not? Webb knelt once more, eye level with this small alien child who was asking him to explain something he'd spent his entire life learning. Because you needed help more than I needed safety. Because I'm bigger and stronger and trained for danger. Because letting you get hurt when I could have prevented it would have hurt worse than anything the vacuum could have done to me. She reached out with one three-fingered hand and gently touched his chest, right over his heart. The Vryn could sense electromagnetic patterns through touch, could read emotional states through bioelectric fields. Webb didn't pull away. He let her read him, let her sense the truth of his words written in the rhythm of his pulse. After a long moment, she withdrew her hand and looked up at her father. They're not broken, Papa. They're just different than us. They're built for a universe that doesn't promise to be kind. Thranxis made that untranslatable sound again. Then he extended one limb to Webb in the Vryn gesture of deep respect. Captain, I came here to condemn your species. I believed Earth was a failed world that produced failed people. I was wrong. You were cautious, Webb corrected. You were protecting your people from something you didn't understand. There's no shame in that. Perhaps not, but there is shame in refusing to learn. The ambassador straightened, and when he spoke next, his voice carried formal weight. I will recommend to the Confederation Council that humanity be granted provisional membership status, with specific consideration for inclusion in emergency response protocols across Confederation space. The other delegates erupted into shocked chirps, pulses, and vocalizations. Chancellor Morston's tendrils writhed in agitation. Ambassador, this is highly irregular. The process requires evidence that a species can contribute to the Confederation's prosperity and security, Thranxus interrupted. I have that evidence. I have seen humans operate under pressure that would break our finest soldiers. I have seen them prioritize protection over preservation, duty over survival. I have seen what it means to evolve in a world that demands excellence or offers extinction. He turned back to Webb. We need you. The Confederation doesn't know it yet, but we need people who understand that safety isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of those willing to stand between danger and the vulnerable. We need Deathworlders, Captain Webb. We need humans. Webb felt Chen's hand on his shoulder, a brief touch of solidarity. Around the training room, the other soldiers had stopped their exercises to listen. This was it. This was the moment 3 generations of humans had been fighting for. Acceptance. Recognition. A chance to prove they belonged among the stars. Ambassador, Webb said carefully, if the Confederation accepts us, you need to understand what you're getting. We're not going to change. We're not going to become softer or gentler or more like you. We're going to keep training our soldiers to run toward danger. We're going to keep building redundancies and fail-safes and backup plans for our backup plans. We're going to keep being paranoid, overprepared, and absolutely unwilling to accept that any situation is truly hopeless. Good, Thranxus said firmly. We don't need you to change. We need you to teach us to survive the way you survive, to face the universe's cruelty with courage instead of panic. To understand that protection sometimes requires sacrifice. He glanced at his daughter, who was watching the conversation with rapt attention. To remember that the strong have a duty to the weak, and that duty transcends self-preservation. The declaration echoed through the training facility, through the station, and, though Webb wouldn't learn this until later, through emergency channels to Earth, to the scattered human colonies, to every outpost where his species waited for news of whether they'd finally be welcomed into the larger galactic community. But in that moment, standing in a training facility designed to forge protectors from the descendants of a failed world, Marcus Webb simply nodded. Then we'll teach you, Ambassador. We'll teach you everything we know about surviving the impossible, about staying calm when the universe is ending, about making the hard choices and living with the consequences. He straightened to attention, and every human in the facility did the same. We'll teach you how to be Deathworlders, and maybe together we'll build a confederation that's stronger than the sum of its parts, one that doesn't just survive in paradise, but can survive anywhere at all. Thranxus touched his daughter's shoulder gently. I think, Captain Webb, that is precisely what we need to learn. And I suspect your failed world is about to teach the rest of the galaxy what true strength really means. On the view screen behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, scarred and beautiful and utterly unforgiving. The world that had tried to kill humanity had instead forged them into something the universe had never seen before. Survivors who refused to let anyone else fail. Deathworlders who feared nothing, not because they were fearless, but because they'd learned that fear was just another obstacle to overcome, on the path to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The tour ended, but the real work was just beginning. And somewhere on that blue-green marble hanging in the void, billions of humans waited to show the galaxy exactly what a failed world could accomplish when given the chance to prove the universe wrong.